What's good, everybody? So, today is the final episode I've decided for the scripting series. So, today we're just going to be doing a recap. Um, and then we're going to make a game, a final project, that's going to reflect everything you've learned. Um, and I've decided it's just going to be a basic part's going to spawn in, and you can pick it up and you can get money. So, yeah, that's going to be basically what we do. And I wanted to prioritize the last 4 episodes, I think, because that's what we've done the most recently. But of course, the first 5 or so episodes, you should have those memorized. And you should understand everything I've said in those videos. Try to, as you go into the intermediate series in the future. But yeah, to recap last episode, we talked about leader stats. We learned that there is a service called the player service, and there's an event attached to that service called player added, and we can connect a function where one of the arguments that you can automatically pass when you call the event, or sorry, when you call the function attached to the event, one of the arguments you automatically get is the player object. So it's attached to each individual player when they join the game. So we can do whatever we want with that player object as long as we know the player joins the game. So that's a pretty useful thing. And yeah, we basically created a way of creating leader stats for the player, and we have to use a very specific name for the folder name, which is the leader stats folder. And then we can create values in that leader stats folder, and those are going to be our stats. And that's essentially all we talked about. Now I'm not going to give you an example because we're actually going to do an example in today's game. So this is going to be very hard. This is going to be the hardest thing we've done through the whole series. Trust me, because it's about 30 to 40 lines of code, which is new for you. I'm assuming you haven't coded that much, and even if you have, it's not this complex. So this is complex code, but it's basically going to let us spawn in a part as soon as we spawn in, but it's only going to spawn in one part at a time, and we can pick up that part to give us money each time a part spawns in. And remember, only one part can spawn in at a time. So I think it's about time. Let's start the final episode. So we're gonna go ahead and insert a script, of course. That's what we always do. Then I know automatically I want to create our leader stats. So player added connect function player is our argument we can pass through. Then we're going to say local leader stats. You can name this variable whatever you want. We're going to do instance.new folder, and we're going to do leader stats.parent equals player. So the leader stats folder is going to be in the player object when they join the game. And remember, this is going to be for any player that joins the game. And player is just going to be the player that joined the game. And so it can be any number of players. This code will always run for that player. And you have leader stats dot name equals, and then this is the specific part, so you have to specifically call it leader stats like that. Then we can define a stat, so let's do local cache equals instance.new int value, and let's say cache.parent equals leader stats. Let's say cache.name equals cache. And then we're done that. So now we want to define a function that's going to create a part, and it's going to regulate how many parts can spawn in. It's going to regulate how much money you can pick up from each part. And we're going to add something called debounce again. So maybe this will get you some better practice with debounce because I know it can be a little confusing at first. So we're going to say local function create part, we'll call it. Then we're going to go down. We're going to say, well, make a while loop. We're going to say, and I'll show you why we need that later. But for now, let's say, okay, we're going to create the part. So what's the first thing we do? Well, we have to define the part. So local part equals instance.new part. Where do we put it? We put it in the workspace. There. It did it. Okay, great. So now we're going to define a boolean. I'm going to say local part active. So there is a part now. So when we run this function, a part exists. So now we need to know that this part is active. There's an active part in the workspace. So we're going to say true. Then we're going to say part.touched connect function hit. Okay, so I haven't talked about this. So hit, just like player added, has a built-in argument called player, and it refers to the player object in the player service. Part.touched, this event automatically passes an argument called, well, not called hit, but this is just what I set it as. But basically, it represents the individual part that touched the part. So now we're going to define player. Local player equals game dot players colon get player from character hit dot parent, and you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. All right, so how do we, what is this? So get player from character is a method of the player's service, and what this means is we're going to get the player object from our character, which is in the workspace. And why is it hit.parent? Well, let me just disable this script here so that it doesn't run. Let's go ahead and play. I want to show you why it's hit.parent. Okay, I'm going to show you exactly why that is the case. So when we load in and our avatar is in the workspace, you can see that every part of us is its own individual part. But you notice that all the parts that are in us are all children of our character or our player model. And our player model is just known as our character. So let's say there's a part, imaginary part here, and I touch it. Any part that touches here, or that touches the other part, it's going to be that individual part. So let's say like right lower leg or something like that. It's just a child of our character. So hit, so let's say hold up. Where's my foot? Where do I find my foot? There it is. Okay, let's say my left foot hits the part. Well, we're gonna do hit dot parent. That's our character. Our right foot dot parent is just our character model. And that is what I mean when I connect this, and let's enable this script again. So disabling it just means it doesn't run when you run the game. So game.player is get player from character. This is a unique function in the player's service that lets you get the player object. So whatever's in here, it lets you refer to it. And we're talking the same player object that this talks about. So parent equals player. It's the same thing. The one that's in this player's service. So hit dot parent, remember? Let's say right foot, for instance, dot parent, get player from character. Well, this has to be our character model, right? See, right here. Hit dot parent would be the parent of the right foot, let's say. And that's the model. And if we have the character model, we can retrieve the player and we store it into a variable and we call it player. So now we have access to the player object. So now we're going to check, because when the part is touched, we want to make sure that the part that is touching the part is our player. So we say if player is equal to nil, which means if there's nothing, there's no player, then we're just going to return. But down here, if we make it down here, then we know for a fact that it is a player. Well, if it is a player that touched it, then let's go ahead and do what we want to do, which is, all right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to destroy the part. So we're going to do part, destroy, then we're going to do player, and this is another reason we wanted to retrieve the player, so we can access player.leaderstats.cache.value equals the same thing, but plus equal to 1. So plus equal to just means player.leaderstats.cache.value equals player.leaderstats.cache.value plus 1. That this is the same thing, and I use this syntax over the other method, which is essentially just to do this. I'll write it out just so it makes sense for you guys. This right here is the same thing as writing plus equal to 1. It's the same thing. And the part's destroyed, which means is the part active anymore? No, it's not. So let's do part active equals false. And you're going to see where this comes in soon enough. So we're going to go down here, and we're going to say if part active, well, I should probably define this stuff out here. So let's say local part active equals false, because initially it's not going to be, but once we enter this function, then it's going to be true. So if part active is equal to false, then we're going to go ahead and execute the function, because we only want create part to execute when there's no part in the workspace. Because remember, don't pay attention to all this gibberish. Just pay attention to this. We create a part, therefore a part is active. We destroy that part, therefore the part is not active. So if the part isn't active, then we're going to go ahead and keep running this function. So we only want this function to run when there's no part in the workspace. Now, if we keep checking this, spamming it, remember, it's gonna destroy the game. So we need to wait, let's say, 2 seconds. Okay. So it's gonna check if part active is equal to false every 2 seconds. So, looks like it'll work. Let's see. Let's see if it works. Oh, we got a part. Wait. No, that is not what we want. We only want one part at a time, remember? Well, if we pick them up though, we can see, oh, we got a bunch of money. And they spawn back in, you can see. But this isn't exactly what I want. Why am I getting a bunch of money from one part? It's because we don't have a debounce. And what happens when we don't have a debounce is it's going to blow through everything and it's just going to give us a crap ton of calls. So we only want one call to occur at a time. And how do we do that? Well, let's define debounce. Debounce equals false. Then we're going to say if part active equals false, so there's no part, and debounce is equal to false. Then we're going to go ahead and do that. So now where does this come into the function? Well, we're going to say if player equals nil or debounce is equal to true, then we're going to return. And basically that just means we're going to get out of this function on this call. And if that's not the case, well then we're just going to do debounce equals true. And now let's see if this works. All right. Okay, so I'm back. Turns out the mistake I made was task.wait 2. Basically what happened is it just flew through all this code, but since there was no task.wait, it just automatically kept setting this stuff back to false, and so this function kept calling instantly after every 2 seconds, instead of waiting as it should until the first object is first destroyed and you get your money, blah, 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 blah. So let's go ahead and play it. Let's see if it works. Yes, it does, by the way. So we see one part comes into the workspace. What the heck? Where is it? It's in the center. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I forgot. It's gonna spawn in the center because that's just the default position that it spawns in. So let's just move the spawn location out of the way. And we'll see. It's right there. There it is. Okay, so cache 0, cache 1. Boom. Part. Inserts. Let's wait 2 seconds. Still no part. We step on it. Deletes. We get the money. Part comes back in. Get the money. Boom, boom, boom. Easy. That's what I'm talking about. So now I'm going to do a final recap, and we're just going to talk about everything, how this works. Pretty lengthy for you guys, especially. So basically, the first thing we did is we defined. I'm actually gonna I'm going to copy and paste this code into the comments or somewhere in the description or something for you guys so that you can review this, try to understand it, try to break it down in your head. Um, yeah, but basically this block here, entire block, just creates our stats or our leader stats, whatever you want to call it. Then we're defining our controllers, if you want to call them that. Basically, it's going to control when this function can run, specifically because we've set it as a condition for the function to run, debounce and part active. Then we have the actual create part function. And then we have, so in this function, the first thing we want to do is we want to create a part and put it in the workspace. Then we want to say, okay, the part is active. Then we want to say, well, when is the part touched and by what? We define the player. We learn that there's a unique method in the player service called getPlayerFromCharacter, and you pass the character model into this parameter here, and it's hit.parent. Then we said if debounce is true or player is equal to nil, then we want to return. Because we know part is going to be touched at a lot of times, right? So we want to make sure that if any of this stuff happens, we want to make sure that the only stuff that passes through here is our player, right? And any other instance of a part touching the part is going to be ignored if there first isn't a player and second the debounce is true. Or sorry, if these conditions are met, then we're going to return. So if debounce is true or if there is no player, then we're going to go ahead and return. Then we're going to set debounce to true. So now we're assuming that debounce is false. And we're also going to assume that the player is not equal to nil, which means there is a player. So now we're going to set it to true. We're going to destroy the part, and we're going to add some money to the player leader stats. Then we're going to wait 2, and then we're going to go ahead and set debounce to false and part active to false. Then we define a while loop, which just means this function is going to keep calling over and over and over again in this separate little loop here. And we have a condition that debounce must be false and part active must be false. Then we're going to wait 2 because we don't want to spam the while loop. So we're going to wait 2 seconds and it's going to keep checking this condition. And if these conditions are eventually met, well, then we're going to call the function. So the reason we need debounce and part active is to regulate what calls of this touched function or this function in general are allowed to process any of this information here, right? Because it has to get past this condition, right? And as soon as we call this function, part active is true, which means that, well, we can't call it anymore because there's already a part, right? So part active equals false, then we're going to call this, but part active equals true as soon as we call it. So part active regulates the amount of parts that we can have because it's only going to call this function once at a time until it knows that part is no longer active, which only occurs after the part is destroyed, which means we can call the function again. And we wait a certain period of time so that stuff doesn't spawn in like immediately or our while loop doesn't crash. You get what I mean. You could wait like, I don't know, 1 second. This is just, it's gonna check every 1 second to see if these conditions are true. Task.wait2 just means, well, before we exit this function and all this stuff so that we can call it again, we want to make sure we wait 2 before we call this function because these conditions, once these are both false, then we can call the function again. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And obviously I'm going to define, I don't know, let's say function call loop, there, just like that. And we've defined everything we need to. So we got 4 main parts here. We got the function call loop, we got the function itself, then we got defining our controller, so what calls are going to get passed, and which ones are going to just return, or when is our function going to run, right? And then we have our stats, which we talked about last video. So that about does it, folks. for this, not just this episode, but for this series. Sadly. I hope you guys enjoyed the series. I hope you learned a lot. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to get into the intermediate series. Teach you guys a whole lot of new stuff, intermediate level coding. So it's going to be a lot harder, but it's going to include crucial information that you need to know in order to make your games. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the series. And until next time, as always, I will see you later. Peace.